It's going to take some time if we do one by one, so I can just, if on 3 you just say your name all at the same time and we can be done with that, that'd be great. So say your name on 3. Let's try it. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Toby. You're going to see a ton of pretty slides in a second. As Masek said, I've been very lucky enough to sort of grow up at a few companies in Sweden. Minecraft being one, where I was the design director for that franchise for some time. Then I was also lucky enough, of course, that Spotify is sort of funded and started in Stockholm. So I, by accident, got into Spotify very early on when I was 21, and by accident was made responsible for all of the UI design because they had a very talented designer, and he did everything. He hired me, and then he quit the same week that I started because he was fed up with the company, as you are with some startups. And then, of course, someone stole his computer the same week. So I was left with nothing, and they were very unlucky to have me in that situation. But I was very lucky to grow up there. Maciej. There we are. Look, we have slides. Awesome. So I want to talk about this today, the creativity of diverse crowds, and especially I think it's important on a day like this, where we meet and have a very interactive event peer-to-peer. I think it's also extremely critical when we work together at our workplaces to really understand how diversity in itself can cause more creativity. And then we were wrapping presents like this. We were using a red wax, like you see here, to make them pretty, right? Super cool. And we were doing all of that work on top of her grandmother's old handmade cloth that looked like something like this. And after a few hours, someone literally screamed from the kitchen, and we had, of course, spilled a ton of red wax on that cloth, and it felt like it was ruined. And at that point, it felt like everyone was just sad, and Christmas was ruined, and I could just go home. End of relationship. At this time, I think I was at Spotify, and I was teaching creativity and having workshops. So I told her mom, we can just experiment. It's fine, which wasn't very popular. But we realized after a time, like, we don't have a choice. That's the only thing that we can do. So we started by finding a similar cloth, and then we shredded that cloth into smaller pieces, and then we duplicated the problem. So we spilled a bunch of red wax on those pieces of cloth, right? And then we brainstormed, what could we do? We found different combinations of alcohols and whatnot, right? To try on these things. And we tried over and over again and experimented, and of course, like, we failed a lot until one of them actually worked on one of these pieces. And it just disappeared without a trace. So we could take that solution and apply it to the original problem, and Christmas was saved. Not the relationship, though, but that's a different story. So this, to me, was a genuine creative process, and I was very happy looking back at it, like, that sort of instills and summarizes what I think a good creative process is. But it was also learning for me that we can be so much more creative together, especially when we came together, different generations, working on the same problem, and I'm absolutely sure that none of us could have solved that without the other one, the mother and myself. And to me, that was a learning, and I'm from Sweden, here, famous for red houses and build the bookshelf and meatballs. And I grew up here on the West Coast and moved here then to work at a few different companies. So now I'm at GitHub, I'm a design engineer, so I do both design and engineering, and especially when they overlap. Before that I was at Minecraft, now before that at Spotify. And this is sort of how I grew up. So this is the time when I talked about when I was 21. This is the product team at the time. That's Sean Parker, who was an early investor in Facebook, but also invented Napster. And this is micromanagement at its finest. Four people for one designer. And at this point, I remember feeling so strongly that like I would just be better without you all here hovering over my shoulder. But not just in this circumstance, but in most circumstances, honestly. I knew that if I was just left alone, I would work so much more efficiently. And I sort of approached a lot of problems at the time with that mindset. Like, I'm going to work better if you just disappear and don't disturb me. And I've very much since absolutely changed that mindset to sort of be the opposite. And I know that I work more slowly when I work with people, but the outcome is much better and it's much more creative. So I believe that I would be more productive if I could work alone. But I think that when we work alone, or with people who are very similar to us, we're blinded by our beliefs. And we have a lot of expertise in this room. We have a lot of models and frameworks that we use that help us think. But I think when they are the same to a large degree, they don't help us think better, but we often instead end up in the same trap over and over again. It's very difficult for me to find an example of when I didn't come up with an idea that I should have come up with, but I tried to dig through the archives of mistakes that I've done, and I found this. So at Spotify, so often, year over year over year, I would get this problem somehow from a product owner or from maybe the CEO. We need a better way to recommend music. Please design something. And at the time, we were not very many at the company. So of course, as a designer, the first thing that I did was that I sat down and I tried to draw a bunch of screens. Like, how would this look like? Bless you. At the time, the iPhone wasn't really that fancy, right? But we would start by drawing solutions. Maybe we can recommend music this way. What if it looks more like a newspaper and you get a bunch of music when you enter Spotify, right? We often had this kind of mindset as we approached this problem. Now, for years, due to that process, I think we missed the most obvious and effective design that Spotify has yet launched to recommend music. Now they sort of went all in on similar things, so they diluted the value in that particular thing. But I'm speaking of Discover Weekly. How many use Spotify, first of all, just a hands up? Okay, and if you use Discover Weekly, hands up. A lot of you, thank you. So this feature, for those who don't use it or don't know exactly how it works, every single Monday it's refilled with new music. That music is based on your listening, right? So it's both, maybe if you have similar taste to someone else, if they start listening to something, you're gonna get recommended that music. It's also based on if you listen to a type of music and new music is released that sounds similar, just by analyzing the audio, you can get recommended that music. So it's a bit of a mix of different algorithms, but point is, they put all those in a playlist, which means no new UI at all. The solution at its core, it's not visual, right? It's instead using a very clever mechanism, which is use something that everyone already knows about, a playlist, and then it has, I think, it's sort of evil, but also nice. Every single Monday, it renews, which means you look forward to that, but also you're going to miss out on the stuff that's in it unless you listen before Monday. So sort of a stressful event, but it's extremely popular. So many use this regularly. It's one of the most used features, millions of people, and we never saw it because in our team, we didn't work cross-functionally, for example. I did not embed with the people who work with the algorithms, and I saw every problem as something that needed to be solved through my core skills, which were design. If all you have to hammer, everything looks like a nail, or as designers, we always assumed the solution would be visual. And yes, we worked effectively, as in we produced a lot of ideas, but none of them worked, and it took years for Spotify to come up with the most obvious solution to this problem, which was no UI. So I think homogeneous teams might be productive, but they can be blinded by their similarities. And I sort of want to go deep on that and talk for today, something to have in mind, both about creativity and how we can look at it, but also then specifically how diversity and how being different can make us stronger as we explore that. So the main thesis for this talk is that diverse groups are more creative. That means, and also, sorry, a sub-thesis is you yourself become more creative if you embed in yourself in more diverse groups. So it's better for the group in itself if it's diverse, but it's also better for you and your own output. We need to look at two things to sort of establish if that is true or not. We need to look at if diverse groups come up with more ideas, as in quantity, but we also need to look at quality and like critical thinking. So we also need to look if diverse groups reason better, if they think better. So I divided the talk in those two parts, and we're going to look at both. But again, I think this is incredibly important today. And these two things, I think, more ideas and critical thinking, sometimes I think we see them as things that are in conflict. Maybe you have someone that you usually work with that is always critical of everything that you say, and you feel like, that's not so nice, that's hampering my creativity, it's not, we don't come into a great workflow. But I think these two things are sort of like yin and yang, or peanut butter and jelly, or R2D2 and C3PO. They are very different. We need both, and they're stronger and better together, those two skills. So we need to talk about both, and they both need to be included in the discussion of creativity. So I've read the talk into these two parts, and I think it's important to talk about today because it affects how we behave. I think it affects how we interpret people who have different ideas from us, different backgrounds, think very critically when we don't want to. Also, think it affects how we build teams when we go back to work, but also how we build our companies and how we hire. And I think diversity is incredibly important to focus on in and of itself. Let's start with having more ideas. So we want to show, sort of today, and take a look at that more diversity basically leads to more perspectives, right? I don't think that's a far reach. If we're different, we're going to have different perspectives. So more diversity means more perspectives, and more perspective means more ideas. We can actually find some quantitative data that this is true for groups by studying social networks and by studying how information flows in different type of networks. Now, we're incredibly lucky, especially in this industry, but at large in the world right now, to have at least two very big social networks that are structured very differently. So we can take a look at how language and memes are created and transformed in these networks and spread, as in compare the creativity of the two, and then compare their structure. The two social networks that we're talking about are Twitter and Facebook. Twitter and Facebook are very, very different in terms that Twitter, you largely follow people that you look up to / that you want to be in touch with. But maybe you don't know. Maybe you get to know them later. Maybe you meet some people at the conference like today and then you follow them. But it's a pretty broad network. It's more diverse. Facebook, on the other hand, is people who you went to school with, a lot of people that you maybe actually don't really like. They're like okay friends. They're all very similar to you, probably. You grew up in the same neighborhood, the same school, maybe have the same job. It's people that you know, but don't necessarily want to know better. So Twitter, very simplistically, is like where you strive to, and Facebook is where you've already been. If you ask people if that's actually how they follow people, we find the same thing. Just to establish that, this is a survey of how people follow others on Facebook, where 66% say that they just follow people they know. And then 30% say they follow a mix of people they know and don't know, and then 3% people they don't know. Twitter is basically the opposite, so we have just 50% who follow people they know, and then they mostly follow people they don't know and they think they are interesting, right? And then we can look at those networks and look at how new expressions are formed, like I don't know, like shorthands, bay, lit, different hashtags, different memes, and we see how they spread and how tiny innovations then and creativity, basically how it's created and propagated through these networks. This is a summary of some of those studies looking at those networks. This is Gretchen McCullough. Twitter, where you're encouraged to follow people you don't already know, has given rise to more linguistic innovation, not to mention memes and social movements, than Facebook, where primarily friend people you already know offline. As in, the diversity of the network of Twitter makes that group, that network, more creative. What's interesting with this is that we have a bunch of studies too that show that this effect actually fades over time. This is from a study where they actually looked at a TV show that was produced over 30 years and looked at the writer teams and how they changed over time. But they found that, which makes sort of sense, we get to know each other over time and we become more similar. So if you enter a group and it's incredibly diverse and you don't know anyone, you get a lot of inspiration and ideas from that group, but it fades over time. So there's also a function to changing groups and making sure that groups evolve, because this effect fades over time. But groups become more creative, but individuals, if you look at every single individual in these groups, also become more creative. This is from another study called How Twitter Users Can Generate Better Ideas. They looked at the performance of employees in a company, and then they looked at how they followed people on Twitter. Sort of a weird study, but they found that if you follow people like this, so again, if you imagine, you know, when you were a kid and you had a can and a line and then another can and you talk to someone, if you had a bunch of those cans, you're the one in the middle and then you're drawing lines to a bunch of other people. If you have a network that looks like this, what it means is a lot of the cans that you draw to people and that you speak to, they don't speak to each other. They're isolated, right? And you compare that to a network like this, where if you're in the middle and you speak to this person speaks to so many other people that you also speak to, which means like the information in this network is less diverse and more redundant, versus the information in this network is less redundant and you have a more diverse point of view. I think this is a perfect visualization of your situation these 2 days, right? And it's a magical place to be in. This is often the situation in our daily lives, and especially at Twitter, where we just hear the same things over and over again. Now, they found that this person, generally, if you have a network like this, you're more creative. So the more diverse a person's social network, the more likely that person is to be innovative. The first thing I did when I saw this study was that I went on Twitter and I followed a bunch of people that I really disagree with. And it's so frustrating. And it's so painful to open Twitter and be like, oh, you're stupid. But it's sort of nice, and it gives you more perspective. And over time, I think at least you can learn to empathize with like, okay, I understand now why they think that way, even if I don't agree. But we become more creative when we surround ourselves with ideas and ways of thinking from others. And it's true, I think this is cool, even when those ideas are just different, like even if they're wrong, it still helps you. So you can open up Twitter and think, oh, they're so stupid. But it still helps you to consider a different point of view. This is from a study from Charlotte Nemeth at the University of California in Berkeley. She puts it like this: minority viewpoints are important not because they tend to prevail necessarily, but because they stimulate divergent attention and thought. As a result, even when they are wrong, they contribute to the detection of novel solutions and decisions that on balance are qualitatively better. As in, just because you have a group of people in a room and someone disagrees with you, that's going to help the entire room to think more broadly and better. As in, just speaking up, just voicing a minority viewpoint is better for the group, even if it ends up being that that decision doesn't have much more value, because it introduces more ideas to the group. And more ideas in itself helps the group think better. Now, this is a problem too. We need to think better, and that's very, very difficult. And we're very similar in many ways, right? We all have a brain that's like about the size of a fist. We come from this planet, and we've grown up at different places here. In many, 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 many ways, we are exactly the same, but just being from different places makes us different. Our expertise makes it different. The education we have, the age we have, everything have some value to it, and those differences makes us more creative. And I want to take a pause here and just tap into that for a second with another practical session. We just had one here before. I'm not sure how many of you liked it, maybe 60%. We're gonna do another one real quick. So in a second, I'm gonna ask you to stand up, and we're gonna spend a minute on this. I want you to find one person next to you, so 2 and 2. If you're the odd one out, though, please join another group, so you're 3. Okay? So there's an after party later, and I want you to imagine that you're the organizer of this event, you have unlimited budget, and you're gonna organize the best party ever on Monday after the event. And then one of you is gonna start, let's organize the best party ever. And then the other one of you is gonna say yes, and then you're gonna suggest something to do at that party. Okay, it could be yes, and we should have pink horses. And then the other one says yes, and then you suggest something else. And then you should have as many ideas as possible within 45 seconds. So please stand up, find a partner, and start having some ideas. All right, thank you, thank you, thank you. You can have a seat. Please sit down. Yeah?
Are you able to finish by 10:15?
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Really sorry.
No problem. Yeah. I can speed up a bit. Yeah.
If you want to do something later, maybe some exercise, something else for the room upstairs. One of the rooms will be available to do.
No problem. Yeah. No, I can just speed up a bit. It's fine. Yeah.
So 15 minutes is okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Sit down, please. Thank you all. You can sit down. Thank you. Please have a seat. Please have a seat. Please have a seat. Please sit down. Please sit down. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. So, please find a crew member later and tell them your ideas. I'm sure they'll be very, very happy. You just had a bunch of bad ideas. I think, sorry. I think some of them were probably good. Some of them were probably creative. But most of them were probably stupid. And And that's fine, and I think that's the fun part of it, right? And we need a lot of good ideas to propel us forward. Now, most of them will be really bad, and that's completely fine. A lot of stupid ideas can inch us towards a great idea. We see this very practically. This is not something that we just say, but we see this very practically if we actually look at how machine learning works. This is a perfect playthrough of Super Mario, right? No faults. It's not done by a human at all. It's done by a machine learning algorithm called MoreIO. And it's difficult to be more effective than this playthrough, right? Everything is timed perfectly, but the computer here does not know anything about how Mario works. It doesn't have any feelings. It doesn't know what an enemy really is or how it works. It's not afraid of it. All it knows is that it should go as far as right as possible on this screen, and it could press a bunch of buttons. That's basically what it knows, right? In the beginning, this is how it looks like. This is what it can do. It can press a bunch of buttons. When it blinks, it fails so miserably, it just restarts and tries something else. Here's what it does after a while. It realizes I can press right. So it presses right, but it doesn't do much else because it's kind of stupid. And that's it, it just presses right. So the things that it tries here, they are not thought through in any way at all, right? It just tries a bunch of things. It's a bunch of stupid ideas. But over time, because it has a good selection process, just by having non-thought-through ideas, it arrives at an excellent playthrough. And within that, there are some creative ideas. Now, I think this is the tricky part. And when we have a bunch of ideas like this, a quantity of those ideas is important in and of itself because it helps us map the shape of a problem space. So we don't need ideas that are always better, necessarily. We just need a lot of them, and that takes us far. And in that journey, we need as many perspectives as possible to look at a problem from as many angles as possible. But we also, of course, need an effective way of selecting and filtering ideas. And that's having better ideas, right? So for the last part, I just want to talk about this and how groups are affected by diversity in this sense. If we think about it, if we have ideas at our workplace, how do we know if ideas are good or not? It's sort of difficult before we try them, so we do a lot of prototyping and stuff. Like we try to try things. So we usually try them in some cheap way, or we guess. It's difficult to try things, like it's expensive. It takes a lot of time to do prototypes or user testing or whatever. So we can't afford to try them, so we mostly guess. When we guess with money, we usually use words like predictions, business plans, and analysis, but nevertheless, they are guesses, right? The problem is then, of course, that we're notoriously bad at guessing and predicting the success and accuracy of our ideas. I found some difficult, painful examples of this. This is a parrot. We launched this in Minecraft, so you could have that as a pet. I'm not sure if you used it, but you could feed it chocolate, as seen here. You could feed the chocolate, or you could feed chocolate to the parrot to breed it, so you could have more parrots. That's great. Minecraft is played by millions of kids, so many kids. About 50% of kids in the US between 9 and 12 at any given point in time, they are active Minecraft players. And there's a big, actually, there's a big problem with this feature. You can feed parrots with chocolate to breed them, but in real life, parrots can die of chocolate, like if you give it to them, which is not great. This is what happened on Reddit. Dear Mojang, please remove feeding chocolate to birds to make them breed. Millions of kids will play this game. You pick the one food in the game that will kill them to make them breed and tame them. It got like a few upvotes. Sorry. It got picked up by my motherboard. The Minecraft community is rocked by parrot poisoning controversy. NPR picked it up too. Don't feed parrots chocolate, despite what happens in Minecraft. And we couldn't have guessed in any sort of way that we would teach kids accidentally to become parrot-killing machines. We fixed it, but I think that was the most difficult thing to predict for me ever. So don't do that. On a more serious note, though, if you look at Spotify and its culture of assessing ideas, generally every new feature that Spotify launches has been assessed quantitatively in multiple A/B tests, right? As in an A/B test, when we divide a random sample of people, we put them in groups, we call those groups A and B and so forth, and we expose them to different experiences. For example, this is a real A/B test that we did. This is how the menu looked like at Spotify a long time ago with a slide-out menu, and we tried that versus B when you had the same menu running along the bottom, a standard tab bar. At the time, a hamburger menu was extremely popular, but this was getting more popular, so we wanted to try it. We then measure if people behave indifferently. We isolated 100,000 people using A, 100,000 people using B, and we looked at retention specifically. Will people come back more to Spotify if they use version B versus version A? Now, that worked. That actually worked. This version performed much better than this, and we ended up launching that version, and it's still a variant of that version that is live today. But there's seldom a straight line between one good idea and another, right? And the process looks more like this. We start here, and we run so many tests on the way, and we have so many ideas, like in brainstorm sessions like we just had now, and we end up with one of them being good and clearly better, and we can measure that. But 9 out of 10 tests fail on that journey. And it's just the tests that we have picked, worked through for weeks, and we think they are the best, but 9 out of 10 fail. As in, most ideas will be kind of stupid in the end, in some way. And it's incredibly difficult to predict this, which is going to fail or not. But we need to reason together better to become better at predicting what is going to work or not, and to arrive at those solutions, right? This is two old men. This is the King of Sweden to the right. This is Donald Kahneman. I'm not sure if you remember him. This is what he got the Nobel Prize in Economics for a few years back, for having integrated insights from psychological research into economic science, especially concerning human judgment and decision-making under uncertainty, as in pretty much a lot of our jobs, I think, affected by this. He wrote this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and essentially what he tried to do is he tried to summarize how bad we are at reasoning. Like, he doesn't have a solution. He's just like, we don't reason very well. Here's a bunch of experiments that shows that very clearly, and our reasoning is just so full of preconceived ideas and biases. Now, I'm not sure if you've read this book, but it's basically a problem definition, and it comes without a solution. It's incredibly interesting, but there's no solution in sight. And Donald Kahneman even said himself, this is in a podcast interview with Sam Harris just 3 years ago, in terms of my intuitions being better than they were, no. And furthermore, I have to confess, I'm also very overconfident, even that I haven't learned. It's hard to get rid of those things. I've been studying that stuff for over 50 years and don't think my intuitions have really significantly improved at all. As in, it's a great problem definition, but it's not a solution. There are some other writers, though, that have focused on different aspects of reasoning that I think can give us a clue. Donald Kahneman's research focuses only on individuals who reason, right? You get a problem yourself. But the solution probably lies in groups reasoning together. And diverse groups reason better, as in the solution to the problem that Kahneman is outlining is actually to reason in groups. This idea is propagated and spread a lot by this researcher, Dan Sperber, who's at Sorbonne, but also Oxford. And his take is that reason evolved as a feature in humans, not for people themselves, but to help groups. He says, reason is not geared to solitary use, to arriving at better ideas, at better beliefs and decisions on our own. Instead, what reason does rather is help us justify our beliefs and actions to others, convince them through argumentation, and evaluate the justifications and arguments that others address to us. As in, reasoning is a social function. And he did a bunch of experiments where, for example, he showed that you only reason so much as you think that you need to in a certain context. As in, you might have to explain yourself to someone, and if it's a child, you might just say, yeah, because, right? But then the more you think of someone, the more you're gonna put energy into actually crafting your reasoning to convince that person. And he thinks that reasoning evolved in this context to mostly have a social function, which means that if you look at Kahneman, yes, when we reason for ourselves, we're often at fault because we're not very good at it, / we actually don't put in the energy that we need to. We always put in the minimal amount of effort, but as soon as we're in a social context, we reason better. So the solution then is we have to reason for others and explain ourselves to others, not for ourselves. Jonathan Heath called this as a function, what we're trying to do is we're trying to institutionalize disconfirmation. As in, at work, at a context like today, we want to institutionalize, as in put in a system that people disconform, they don't agree. Which I think, to a large degree, we get through diversity. So, we have to reason for others, not for ourselves. And I think especially in this day and age, we think of often having a different point of view as something bad, especially in politics. Like polarization in itself can feel like we have people on one end of the spectrum pulling people in one way, people on another end of the spectrum pulling people in another way, and that's just a source of conflict. It's not going to make anything better. But their point is that this process actually sharpens everyone's arguments and make us better together. We have another quantitative study on exactly this, which is The Wisdom of Polarized Crowds. It's published in Nature, and here's from this study. So what they did was that they looked at strong political perspectives have been associated with conflict, misinformation, and reluctance to engage with people and ideas beyond one echo chamber. Here we explore the effect of ideological composition on team performance by analyzing millions of edits to Wikipedia's political, social issues, and science articles. As in, simply put, they are looking at Wikipedia and how good certain articles are, and associating that with how many edits they have, but also how contagious they are or contentious they are, and how much conflict sort of they entail. Like if you have an issue on Joe Biden, that's going to have a lot of edits from both people on the political spectrum. They found that our analysis reveals that polarized teams consisting of a balanced set of ideologically diverse editors produce articles of higher quality than homogeneous teams. As in, polarization and diversity made them better, and the more we fought for those articles, the better they became. So our differences makes us better at reasoning, and especially at a context like today, when we reason together, we become better. So diverse groups reason better, diverse groups come up with more ideas, and I would love for us to just have that with us today, but also at our workplaces and how we hire and how we behave, because I think diverse groups are more creative. We can feel that they are less efficient, but with the right processes in place and the right mindset, we can explore ideas together and reach further. So I encourage you all to today, and tomorrow, and all of life, honestly. Be curious, be open-minded, and listen very carefully, and embrace the diversity of creative crowds. Master of schedule. Do we have time for questions, or should we just cut? 2 questions. Choose them carefully. Don't ask about how we removed the cloth stain, because it's not the point. Here.
You talk about different between Facebook and Twitter, and the way we taking an information. How you think about LinkedIn? This now it's not some connection with form of content we have in Facebook, and the people we really don't know on LinkedIn. This is not now one of the most interesting way.
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I think what I would do is I would look at one of the scholars actually doing research on that subject to find a good answer on this. But to answer your question on what I believe, I think LinkedIn is probably somewhere in between Facebook and Twitter in terms of diversity. And yes, there's a bunch of people that we want to know, that we aspire to get to know better, and that inspires us that we follow on LinkedIn, but it's to a large degree the same profession or discipline that we follow, like people in the same industry. So if you measure just the diversity, I think you're going to find that it's somewhere in the middle, like much more diverse than Facebook, but less so than Twitter, because at Twitter you're going to mix, for example, gifts, scholars, and football and basketball and your best friends versus only people in the same job. Which doesn't mean that it's worse. But I think if you're going to rate the 3 networks, I think LinkedIn is somewhere in the middle. But LinkedIn, I think, is a great option to Twitter in terms of reaching out and staying connected with the industry. And it's growing a lot, and I'm using it more and more as well. Oh, too many hands. Please come
Tobias,
to me.
do you have some time right after this session?
Exactly, I was going to say,
Yeah, we have one extra room upstairs, so if some of you would like to maybe take some of these ideas further with you, why don't we organize a quick impromptu session, Q&A session upstairs?
I can do that, yeah.
Yeah.
Or just find me outside. I can
Yeah.
stand here.
Okay, sorry to cut it short, but we want to really manage with time. Tobias, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank
you. Guys, so we are skipping the break now. So let's go upstairs and we will do the pitches right now. So if you are a speaker at one of the first time slots, please be upstairs in like a couple of minutes, please.